Willa Cather wrote once that the beauty of the land was its indifference, and Hazel Voss didn't understand that until she crossed into Montana on a November train with $43, a carpetbag that had belonged to her mother, and a letter from a man she'd corresponded with for 6 weeks and never met. The letter was practical. She had appreciated that about it. No false warmth, no assurances about things he couldn't know yet. Orchard property outside of Dunmore, apple and cherry, mostly. 60 acres under cultivation, another 20 in pasture. Daughter, age 9. Looking for a woman capable of hard work and sound judgment. The man's name was Callum Hurd. His handwriting was deliberate, the kind that came from someone who didn't write often, and when he did, meant it. She had answered because she was 31 years old, and the school in Billings, where she'd taught arithmetic for 4 years, had closed in September for reasons that had nothing to do with her, and her landlady had been patient, but there were limits to patience when rent was 2 months behind. And the only other offer on the table was a cousin in Ohio who would take her in if she helped care for 3 children under the age of 5. She was fond of children. She was not fond of Ohio. So she wrote back to Callum Hurd, and they exchanged 3 more letters, and then she packed what she owned and got on a train. The platform at Dunmore was short, and the town behind it was modest in the way that frontier towns were modest. Not poor exactly, but without any extra. 1 main street, 2 churches visible from the depot, a feed store, a dry goods operation, small hotel that looked like it had opinions about itself. The mountains were visible to the west in the late afternoon light, dark shapes against a sky that had gone the color of a bruise. She'd grown up in eastern Missouri. Mountains were still something she had to consciously account for when she looked up. He was there. She identified him the way she'd identified Dunmore itself, by process of elimination. He was the only man on the platform not moving with purpose, standing near the far post, watching the train. He was older than his letters, or the letters had made him seem younger. Late 40s, she estimated, a rangy build that spoke to years of outdoor work. He wore a canvas coat that had been mended at the left elbow, with thread that didn't quite match. His hat was pulled against the wind. He was not smiling, but his face had nothing hostile in it either. Just a man waiting to see what had arrived. The girl was not there. Hazel walked toward him with her bag, and he watched her come, and then nodded once, the way you nodded at someone when the expectation had been confirmed. "Miss Voss," he said. "Hazel." She stopped a few feet from him, not offering her hand. It seemed like too much formality for the particular strangeness of the situation. "Callum," he said. He looked at her carpetbag and then toward the cargo car. "Is that everything? There's a trunk." He went to collect it without additional ceremony, which she respected. They loaded it into the bed of his wagon in silence. The horse was a roan, with patient eyes, and a scar along one flank. The drive to the orchard took better than an hour through country that opened up around them as the town fell back, rolling benchland with dry grass laid flat by the November wind, the mountains growing neither closer nor farther, just present the way they always were. Callum drove. He didn't fill silence with noise, which she found she didn't mind. "Your daughter," she said, after 20 minutes. "She's not here. She's at school. Even today." He glanced at her. "She doesn't miss school." Hazel filed that. "You didn't bring her because you weren't sure how it would go," she thought. "You didn't want her to see another woman arrive and then leave." The orchard announced itself before the house did. Even in November, leafless, the trees had a particular order to them, rows running east to west in the long, low light, the branches reaching up and out in the trained shapes of years of careful pruning. She counted columns without meaning to. It was a teaching habit, the automatic application of arithmetic to whatever was in front of her. 60 acres under cultivation, he'd said. That was a significant operation. The house was a 2-story frame structure set at the top of a gentle rise above the orchard floor. It had a good roof. The porch needed work. She could see from a distance that one of the support posts had settled, and the railing along the east side was gone entirely. The kitchen garden was a wreck of dead stalks and last year's growth, but the bones were there. 2 outbuildings to the south, a barn that was in better condition than anything else she could see, which told her something. The hard winter hit right after the first one, she thought. He's been maintaining what keeps the trees and the animals alive and letting everything else wait. "It needs attention," Callum said. He'd pulled the wagon to a stop and was looking at the house the way people looked at things they'd stopped quite seeing. "Most things worth keeping do," she said. He stepped down and went for her trunk. She stepped down herself before he came around, and he noticed. The inside of the house was clean in the functional way of a household, run by a man who kept things orderly out of necessity rather than inclination. Nothing unnecessary, nothing comfortable, particularly. A kitchen table with 2 chairs, and a third that didn't match. A wood stove working properly. The parlor had a stone fireplace that hadn't been used recently. She could tell by the cold air that came from the flue and the clean state of the hearth. One rug worn to threads in the walking paths. No curtains. There was a photograph on the mantel. A woman with light hair and a direct gaze, standing in an orchard. Summer light. The trees behind her were full and green and heavy. Her room was off the back hall, small with a window facing the orchard. A narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a hook on the door, a stub of candle on the sill. Callum stood in the doorway while she set her bag on the bed. He had his hat in his hand, and he was looking at the floor in the way of a man who had something to say that he hadn't arranged yet. "My daughter's name is June," he said finally. "She's 9. She's been running this household since she was 7. He paused. "She's done a good job of it. I want you to know that before you start changing things." Hazel turned around and looked at him. "I'll learn what's here before I change anything," she said. He nodded once and put his hat back on and went back outside. June Hurd arrived home from school at 4 in the afternoon, walking the last quarter-mile from the road herself, her boots leaving small regular prints in the thin mud along the path. Hazel was in the kitchen when she heard the door. She stayed where she was, at the counter doing nothing in particular, giving the girl room to make her own approach. June came into the kitchen and stopped. She was small for 9, with her father's coloring, dark hair, dark eyes, a face that made careful decisions about what it showed. She was wearing a coat that was too short in the sleeves and carrying a school reader under one arm. "You're here," June said. It wasn't hostile, just a statement. "I'm here," Hazel said. She didn't move toward the girl. "I'm Hazel." June looked at her with the particular assessment of a child who had learned the hard way to form her own judgments. "You're taller than I thought," June said. "Is that a problem?" June considered this seriously. "I don't know yet." Then she hung up her coat and her reader and went to check the stove, with the matter-of-fact competence of someone who had been doing this for 2 years. That evening at dinner, venison stew that Callum had started before he went to collect Hazel, bread that June had made that morning with the easy confidence of long practice. They ate mostly in silence. June ate with her back straight and her elbows off the table. She cut her bread carefully, ate it in small pieces, watched Hazel without appearing to watch her. "I'd like to see the orchard tomorrow," Hazel said. Callum looked up. "First light or after?" "First light," she said. He nodded. "Cold before dawn. I know what cold is." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. June, who had been cutting her bread, said without looking up, "The tree at the end of row 14 has a canker on the east branch. Papa's been watching it." "Thank you," Hazel said. "I'll look for it." June picked up her bread. She didn't say anything else, but she didn't leave the table either. She stayed through the rest of dinner, and she poured Slohar's coffees without being asked, which was either habit or the beginning of something else. Hazel didn't make anything of it. Some things you noticed and held quietly. The orchard at first light in November was a different thing from anything she'd taught about or read about. The trees stood in their rows in the gray dawn like a congregation waiting for something, frost still white on the upper branches, the ground hard underfoot. She walked beside Callum through the first rows, while the sky went slowly from gray to pale, and he talked in the economical way he talked. Not sparse exactly, but without decoration. "Mostly winesap and Jonathan apple," he said. "The cherry block is the 6 rows east of the creek. Processing shed is at the south end. We sell to 2 buyers, a wholesale grocer in Butte and a small cannery operation in Bozeman." He paused. "Used to sell to 3. What happened to the 3rd? He was quiet for a beat. "The contract changed terms last year. We didn't renew." She heard what was underneath that and didn't push at it. Not yet. She walked the rows through the morning. She wasn't an orchardist. She'd told him that plainly in the second letter, and he hadn't withdrawn the offer. But she'd grown up on a mixed farm in Missouri, and she understood how land worked, how you read it, how the condition of a thing told you what it had been through. She knew what neglect looked like, and she knew what attention looked like. The orchard was somewhere between the two. The trees themselves were well maintained. The pruning showed years of careful work, but the irrigation channels had silt in them. The grafting records tacked to the processing shed wall were 2 years out of date. The equipment had the look of tools that were being kept running but not repaired properly. She found row 14. The canker was there, on the east branch of a mature wine sap, a sunken, dark area about 4 inches long. She touched it and then looked at the trees on either side. They were clean. "It hasn't spread," Callum said. He was a few steps back, watching her. "Not yet." "How long has it been there?" "I noticed it in September, maybe August." She straightened up. "It needs to come out before spring. The whole branch, clean-cut, below the infection, treated with lime sulfur. If you leave it into the growing season, you risk the whole tree and anything adjacent." He was looking at the branch, not at her. "I know." She waited. "I've been managing a lot of things alone," he said. His voice was level. Not defensive. Just the statement of someone accounting for something honestly. "I know you have," she said. He looked at her then. She held the look, which she'd learned was the right thing to do when a person needed to know they were being taken seriously. "I'll help where I can," she said. "Tell me what you need most." He thought about it. Genuinely thought. The way she was coming to understand he did most things. "The irrigation," he said. "I've been meaning to clear the channels since October, and I haven't had a day that wasn't taken up by something else." "Show me how they're supposed to run," she said. "I'll start this afternoon." He looked at her for a moment longer. "All right," he said. She spent that afternoon with a long-handled spade working silt out of the main irrigation channel, while Callum worked on equipment in the barn. June appeared at the end of the school day and stood at the edge of the orchard watching Hazel work for a long moment before she came across the grass. "What are you doing?" June asked. "Clearing the channel," Hazel said. "So the water runs right in spring." June looked at the channel and then at the amount Hazel had done. "You've been at this a while." "Since 2 o'clock. June was quiet for a moment. "Papa said Mrs. Tillett tried to clear the south channel last spring. She was the woman before the one, before you. She quit after an hour. Hazel kept moving dirt. How many have there been?" June picked at a loose thread on her coat sleeve. 4, she said. "Counting you." She delivered it without cruelty, the same way she delivered everything, as information, for the use of whoever needed it. "I don't have anywhere better to be," Hazel said. "I expect I'll stay longer than the others." June didn't respond to that directly. She sat down on the grass at the edge of the channel and pulled out the reader she'd brought from school and opened it. And she read quietly, while Hazel worked for another hour until the light failed. That was, in its way, the beginning of the change between them, though it didn't announce itself as anything. The parlor fireplace had not been used in months. Hazel confirmed it was drawing properly on the 4th evening and built a fire in it, a careful one, nothing dramatic. She was sitting near it mending a pair of work gloves when Callum came in from the evening barn check. He stood in the doorway of the parlor and looked at the fire the way a person looked at something they'd forgotten was possible. "Haven't used that room," he said. "I noticed." She didn't look up from the mending. "There's no reason it can't be." He went to bed without coming in. But the following evening, he sat in the other chair with a length of harness he was repairing, and they spent an hour in the same warm room without unnecessary conversation, which was not nothing. It was on the 3rd week that she found the contracts. She had been looking for the orchard's records, sales figures, yield numbers, the baseline arithmetic of the operation. She asked Callum where he kept them, and he directed her to the desk in the parlor. And she spent a Thursday afternoon going through the folder she found there while June was at school, and Callum was in the processing shed. The folder held 3 years of sales receipts. The wholesale grocer in Butte, the cannery in Bozeman, and a 3rd set, from a buyer she didn't recognize. The 3rd set stopped 2 years ago, which tracked with what Callum had said about the contract not being renewed. She pulled the 3rd set and went through it slowly. The tonnage was there. The grade assessments were there. She had grown up on a farm that sold fruit, and she knew roughly what premium apple variety brought at wholesale. The difference between what the Butte grocer was paying and what the 3rd buyer had been paying was significant. But that wasn't what caught her attention. What caught her attention was the grade assessments on the 3rd buyer's receipts. Year after year, the Herd Orchard's fruit was graded 1 tier below what the Butte grocer's receipts showed for the same seasons. Same trees, same varieties, same harvests. 2 different sets of records, 2 different grades. She sat with that for a long time. She went back to the Butte receipts and compared them against the cannery receipts, and then against the 3rd set again, and the pattern held. Consistent, year after year. The third buyer had been assessing the Herd Orchard's fruit at a lower grade than every other buyer, which meant a lower price per hundredweight, which, across the volume of what they'd been selling, amounted to a significant loss over 3 years. She did the arithmetic 3 times on a piece of paper, with conservative assumptions, before she accepted the number she was getting. That evening after dinner and after June had gone to her room to do her reading, Hazel set the contracts on the table and laid her calculations beside them. "I was looking at the orchard records," she said. Callum looked at the papers. His expression shifted into the careful neutral that she was learning to read as a man preparing for something he didn't want to be told. "Who did you sell to before the Butte grocers?" she asked. "Man named Dillard. Owen Dillard, out of Missoula." She kept her voice even. "How long were you doing business with him?" 8 years. He paused. "He started buying from my father before I took the orchard over. We just kept on." She turned the calculations toward him. "He's been grading your fruit 1 quality tier below the Butte buyer," she said. "Every year. The tonnage is the same. The grade assessments aren't." Callum looked at the papers. He didn't speak. "I may have the market figures wrong," Hazel said. "I'm working from what I know about Missouri prices and what I've found in the agricultural papers at the Dunmore post office. But the internal comparison alone, the grade difference between Dillard and your other buyers, that's in your own records." He pulled the papers toward him and looked. He went through them the way she had, page by page, and she watched his face and didn't look away, because looking away would have been the wrong thing. "You cut the contract," she said finally, "last year." He set the papers down. "I cut it because the terms changed." He raised his price on transport and dropped his guarantee window. "I thought it was greed. I didn't think." He stopped. He knew exactly what he was doing, she said. Callum was quiet for a long time. The stove ticked. Outside the wind had come up, the particular sound of a Montana November moving through the orchard. "That was 8 years, he said. His voice was flat in the way she'd come to understand, meant he was holding something under pressure. "I know. My father sold to him before that." He pushed back from the table slightly, not getting up, just moving. "You're saying this goes back further than my records show?" "I don't know," Hazel said. "I can only speak to what's here." He looked at her. "How much?" She turned to the calculation she'd done on the separate page. "Across 3 years, on the conservative end," she said, and named the number. It sat between them in the quiet kitchen. He stood up after a moment and went to the window and stood looking out at nothing, because it was dark and there was nothing to see. She let the silence stay. This was his to feel, not hers to manage. She had put the information in front of him and the rest of it was his. After a while, he said, "I need to think." "That's fair," Hazel said. He came back to the table and closed the folder. He didn't hand it back to her. He kept it in front of him. She got up and banked the stove for the night and took the lamp to bed. She heard him still at the table when she went down the hall. She heard him still there, much later, when she woke briefly from a half-sleep and the house was otherwise quiet. He thought about it for 3 days. June noticed on the second morning, appearing at Hazel's elbow in the kitchen while Hazel was making biscuits. "Papa's working through something," June said. She kept her eyes on her arithmetic slate. "He is," Hazel said. June turned her slate over. "Is it bad?" "It's hard," Hazel said. "Hard and bad aren't the same thing." June pressed her chalk against the back of the slate. "What's the difference?" "Bad means someone made it that way on purpose. Hard means the truth is heavy and you have to carry it anyway." She turned the dough once. "Your father is carrying something true." June was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up a piece of dough trim from the board and ate it without asking, which was the first thing Hazel had seen her do that was simply childlike, without the careful management that otherwise governed everything she did. "Is he going to be all right?" June asked. "Yes," Hazel said. "He's not a man who puts things down half-finished." June nodded, as if this confirmed something she already knew. She picked up her slate and her reader and went to do her homework at the parlor table, which was new. She'd been doing it in her room. Hazel noted the change and didn't say anything about it. On the third evening, Callum came in from the orchard before dark, which was unusual. He came directly to the parlor where Hazel was going through the irrigation notes she'd been keeping. "I wrote to a man I know in Billings," he said. "He runs a large apple operation. I asked him what he'd been getting per hundredweight on premium wine sap." Hazel waited. He put a folded letter on the table. $32 last fall. "He sold to a cooperative buyer out of Helena." She looked at the letter. "Dillard was paying you how much?" 21. He said it the way a person said a number, when the number had taken 3 days to fully land. She looked at the letter and then at him, and she didn't perform any reaction, because the reaction wasn't hers to perform. This was his money, his father's operation, his 8 years. He sat down across from her. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. I trusted him because my father trusted him, he said. And I didn't look closely because looking closely felt like saying my father had been wrong to trust him, and I wasn't ready to say that. He wasn't wrong to trust him at the start, Hazel said. He was wrong to keep trusting him once the grading patterns were established. Those are different things. He looked up at her. Is there a difference that matters? I think so. Misplaced trust isn't the same as carelessness. You can't know what you don't check for. He was quiet. He turned one of the receipts toward him and looked at it. When does Dillard come through? Hazel asked. He doesn't. We'd reach out to him if we were reopening the contract, so he thinks he lost the account when you didn't renew. He thinks I figured out his transport costs were too high, and the guarantee wasn't worth it, Callum said. He doesn't know what you found. Hazel considered that. Then we have something he doesn't expect, she said. If we go to the cooperative buyer in Helena and secure terms first, we have a position to stand on if he comes back with a better offer. And if he doesn't, we already have somewhere else to go. Callum looked at her for a long moment. You've been thinking about this. Since I found the records. You didn't say anything until you were sure. I didn't want to put something in front of you that I wasn't certain of, she said. He sat with that. Outside, the November orchard was dark and still, the trees standing in their rows the way they always did, indifferent to what the humans inside the house were working through. I'm not good at this kind of thing, he said. Negotiations. Confrontation. He said it plainly. My wife handled most of that. She was better at seeing when something wasn't right and saying so directly. You're seeing it now, Hazel said. Years late. You didn't have the records laid out in front of you before. He was quiet again. That particular quiet of his, that she'd learned to read as something working through something, not dismissal. I'll need your help with the Helena buyer, he said. Writing to them. Understanding what terms to ask for. His voice was careful. That's not in what I asked you here to do. I'm here to make this place work, she said. That's what I'm doing. He looked at her. Something in his face moved. Not relief exactly. Where do we start? But something in the same family. She turned to a clean page in her notebook. Tell me everything you know about the Helena Cooperative, she said. Who's running it, how they operate, what you've heard from other growers. I'll tell you what I know about how to structure the letter. He leaned forward and started talking, and the lamp burned down between them, and outside the Montana wind moved through the dark orchard rows, and neither of them noticed when the hour got late. The weeks that followed had a different quality. Not easier. The work didn't lighten and December came in hard, with a freeze that required checking the wind machines, 3 nights running, and a week where Callum barely slept. But there was something purposeful in it now, a direction. Hazel wrote the letter to the Helena Cooperative. She wrote it twice, the second time better than the first, and she let Callum read both versions and asked which felt more like his voice. And he chose the second and made 2 changes to it, and the final version was something that belonged to both of them. She also began the record she should have had from the beginning. Yield data, tree by tree, block by block, grade assessments in her own hand, using the USDA standards she'd tracked down in the agricultural extension materials at the Dunmore post office. She spent a full week on it, walking the orchard with a notebook, before Callum asked what she was doing, and she showed him. If anyone ever questions our grades again, she said, we have our own records to stand on. He looked at the notebook. He turned a few pages. You marked the canker tree, he said, and the 2 adjacent to it that I want to watch through spring. She pointed to her notations. I've been checking them every 3 days. The canker hasn't moved. He looked at the marked trees and then at her. You've been doing this since the first week. I told you I'd learn what was here first, she said. He handed the notebook back, and she saw something cross his face that she hadn't quite seen before. Not gratitude, which would have been too simple. Something more like the recognition you gave a person when you'd stopped evaluating them and started trusting them. June was changing too, in the careful incremental way that trust changed between people who had good reasons to be cautious. She started appearing in the kitchen in the mornings before Hazel asked her. She started leaving her school reader on the parlor table instead of taking it to her room, which was an invitation of a kind to the shared space of the house. She asked questions, Genuine ones, the kind that wanted real answers. Why did Hazel salt things in stages? Why did the fire draw better from the right side? Why did the canker have to come out below the infection, not just at it? One evening in December, sitting at the table with her slate while Hazel mended, June said without looking up, "My mother used to keep records of the orchard, different from Papa's, smaller things." "What kind of things?" Hazel said. "Which trees budded first?" June said. "Which ones had the best fruit in a dry year?" She kept it in a blue book. Papa called it her brag book. "Do you know where it is?" June was quiet for a moment. "In the trunk in the storeroom." She paused. Papa put most of her things thereafter. Hazel set down the mending. "Would it be all right if I looked at it?" June turned her slate over. "You'd have to ask Papa." Hazel asked Callum the following morning, and the kind of direct way she'd found was the only kind that worked with him. He was quiet for long enough that she thought she'd miscalculated. Then he said, "What do you need it for?" "Observation records," she said. "Over years, on individual trees. That's information I can't replicate in one season. I'd rather build on what she knew than start from nothing." He looked at the storeroom door. He didn't say anything for a while. "She knew this place better than I did," he said finally. "Some parts of it." Hazel waited. He went to the storeroom and came back with the blue book and set it on the kitchen table and didn't say anything else. She thanked him and he went back outside. The blue book was everything June had said. Careful, specific, the observations of a woman who'd paid close attention over many years. First bud dates, frost notes, which trees had surprised her and which had disappointed her and why she thought so. There was humor in it, dry and quick. There were small drawings in the margins. The handwriting was different from Callum's. Looser, faster, the hand of someone who thought quickly and let the pen keep up. She read it that evening and made notes in her own book alongside the records she'd already kept. When June came to the table to do her homework, she looked at the blue book open beside Hazel's notebook. "You're using it," June said. "It's useful," Hazel said. She had good eyes. June sat down. She looked at the page Hazel had opened. "That's row 8. She always said row 8 was the most reliable block in the whole orchard. Why? June reached over and touched a notation in the margin. She thought the slope drained better there. She pointed. "See," she drew it. Hazel looked at the small pencil sketch. "She was right," she said. "You can see where the water runs in a heavy rain. I noticed the same thing when I was doing the irrigation work." June looked at the sketch and then at Hazel's notes alongside it. "Mama was right and you found the same thing," June said. Hazel looked at the girl. "Yes." June was quiet for a moment. Then she turned her slate right side up and picked up her chalk and started her arithmetic, and the quality of the silence between them shifted into something warmer and more settled, the kind that didn't need to be named to be real. The letter from the Helena Cooperative came on a Friday, 6 weeks after Hazel had sent it. It was better than she'd hoped. Not a commitment, an openness to conversation, a set of preliminary terms with price ranges that she copied into her own notebook before showing it to Callum. She showed it to him the next morning at the kitchen table over coffee because she'd learned by then that he took important information better in the daylight. He read it through once, and then again. He set it down and looked out the window at the orchard. $30 to $34, depending on grade, he said. Helena buyer, certified cooperative. Yes. He picked up his coffee. That's $10 above Dillard on our worst year. At minimum, she said. He set the letter down on top of the sales records folder. He was quiet for a while with the particular quality of quiet she'd come to understand was him making a decision rather than avoiding one. "I want to reach back out to Dillard," he said. She hadn't expected that. "Why?" He looked at her. "He's been operating in this county for 30 years, he said. "If he's doing this to us, he's doing it to other people. I want to know what he says when someone puts the numbers in front of him." She considered this. It'll be harder to prove than just walking away. "I know that." He met her eyes. "But my neighbors have been selling to him for the same 30 years. If there's something there, they should know." She looked at him for a moment. He'd said it, simply, without performance, the way he said the things that mattered most to him. "Then we'll need everything clean," she said. "Every record in order, every comparison documented, the Helena terms in writing. He needs to have nowhere to stand." He nodded. "Can you put that together?" "Give me a week," she said. She put it together in 5 days. Owen Dillard arrived on a Tuesday in early January, which was not a time anyone drove out to anyone's orchard for pleasure. He'd written ahead to say he was reconsidering the contract terms and wondered if Callum would be open to discussing it, which meant Hazel thought, that he'd heard something. Word moved in small counties. He was a solid-looking man, somewhere in his 60s, with a neatly trimmed beard and an expression of settled goodwill that she recognized immediately as a professional expression. The kind men wore when they wanted to control the temperature of a room before they walked into it. He shook Callum's hand in the yard with both hands, the warm hold of old acquaintance. He looked at Hazel once. His gaze assessed her the way gaze like that always assessed women who weren't expected to be part of a business conversation. Not hostile, just calibrating. "My wife," Callum said. "Hazel, ma'am," Dillard said pleasantly. Hazel said nothing and did not move toward the house. They went to the processing shed. Dillard moved through it with the ease of a man who had been there many times, commenting on the equipment, the storage setup, the cleanliness of the space. He was practiced at this, she could see. The social warmth, the appeal to shared history. "My father and your father, 30 years. She let him do it. Let him arrive at the conversation he'd come to have. "The contract terms," Dillard said eventually. He named a new price, $3 higher than what he'd been paying. Still $11 below the Helena preliminary. Hazel opened the folder she was holding. "Our records show that over the 3 years we were selling to you," she said, "our fruit was consistently graded one tier below what we received from our other buyers for the same harvests." Dillard looked at her, then at Callum. "Callum," he said, "market grading is complicated. The folder has 3 years of receipts," Callum said. "Ours and theirs. The difference in grade assessment is consistent." She calculated the revenue difference. Hazel set the calculation page on the workbench in front of him. Dillard looked at it. He didn't pick it up immediately. He looked at it the way a man looked at something he'd been hoping wouldn't exist. "There are legitimate reasons grade assessments vary between buyers," he said. "Transport conditions, market timing." "The assessment difference was consistent," Hazel said. "Every harvest, same direction. A variable market moves both ways." This one didn't. Dillard looked at her. The professional goodwill had thinned to something more careful. She was someone he had not prepared for. He looked at Callum again. "You and your father had a relationship going back." "What's the right price for our fruit?" Callum said. His voice was quiet. Not loud, not angry, just the voice of a man who had decided to stand somewhere specific and was standing there. Dillard was quiet. "We have a preliminary offer from the Helena Cooperative," Hazel said. $30 to $34 depending on grade, on our documentation of our own grade assessment. She put the Helena letter on the workbench beside the calculation page. "We're giving you the opportunity to meet those terms because of the history. Not because you're owed it." Dillard looked at the Helena letter. He picked it up and read it, which told her he was serious, that he hadn't dismissed the conversation yet. "This is a regional cooperative," he said. "You understand the logistical complications." "We understand them," she said. "We factored them in. It's a better arrangement at those prices even with additional transport." He set the letter down. He looked at Callum for a long moment, the look of a man assessing whether the person across from him was going to move. Callum's face gave nothing. $32, Dillard said. "On the premium grade." "34 on premium, 30 on base," Hazel said. "Those are the Helena terms. We're not discounting for convenience." He exhaled slowly. "And the historical pricing," he said. "We're not pursuing the past," Hazel said. "We're establishing the terms going forward." She kept her voice level. "But going forward means those are the prices, every year. Or we work with Helena." Dillard looked at the papers on the workbench. He had the expression of a man recalculating something significant. The goodwill was gone now. What was left was the face of a man deciding what the situation cost him. 34 on premium, he said. 30 on base. He looked at Hazel. Going forward, she said. He looked at Callum. "Your wife drives a hard negotiation." "She knows what fair looks like," Callum said. He said it plainly, the way he said most things that mattered, without decoration. Dillard left 2 hours later with a signed bill of terms that Hazel had written in her clear hand, every number specified. She watched his wagon go down the drive, and then stood in the processing shed alone for a moment, with her hands not quite steady, which she allowed. She had been calm in there because she needed to be. That had cost something. She heard Callum come in behind her. She turned around. His face was doing several things at once, which was unusual for a face that generally showed only one thing at a time. She could see the relief and the anger and something else, something older and quieter underneath. 3 years, he said. "Yes, my father probably longer." She didn't say anything to that. There was nothing adequate. He put his hand on the nearest workbench and stood looking at the signed terms. I keep adding it up, he said. What we didn't have. What June didn't have. He stopped. She didn't perform any response. She let him feel what he needed to feel after a while. You did all of this, he said. The records, the Helena letter, all of it. You kept the orchard, she said. The trees are the reason any of it was worth doing. I just read the numbers differently. He looked at her. Thank you. He said it the same way he said the things he meant, without ease, a word that cost something real to produce. You'd have found it yourself eventually, she said. He shook his head slightly. Not in time. She didn't argue. It was probably true. The spring came early that year, which after a January like the one they'd had felt like something personal. The first buds showed on the windsap block in late March, earlier than the Blue Book had recorded in any previous year. Hazel noted it in her own record alongside the annotation from the Blue Book and marked the date with a small star. She had finished the irrigation channels in February, working them section by section on the days when the ground thawed enough to make it possible. Callum had helped on 3 of those days, wordlessly, just arriving with a shovel when he saw her out there. And they'd worked in the comfortable silence that had by then replaced the careful, formal quiet of the first weeks. The house was different, too. Small changes, not dramatic ones. Curtains in the kitchen, made from cloth she'd found in the dry goods store, and sewn herself one evening while June watched, and then after a while, helped hold the hems. A fire in the parlor most evenings now, low enough not to waste wood, warm enough to make the room usable. The photograph of Callum's wife, June's mother, still on the mantel. Hazel hadn't touched it and didn't intend to. Some presences in a house were structural. The canker branch came out in early March, clean-cut, lime sulfur applied, exactly as she'd described in November. The tree was clean through the rest of the spring, the adjacent trees clean as well. She noted it in the record. Dunmore's attention had shifted. She'd become aware of it gradually, the particular calibration of a small community adjusting its position on something. Ruth Tillman at the dry goods store had asked her with genuine curiosity about the Helena Cooperative. Her husband sold apples, too, and she'd heard things. A rancher named Boswell, who ran cattle east of town, had stopped her on the main street and asked, in the careful way of a man who didn't ask for help easily, whether she knew anything about buyers for cattle operations in the region. She'd told him what she knew, and he'd listened and thanked her, and she'd thought, that's how it starts. June reported it from the school end. Mrs. Bauer asked if your wife was the one who sorted out the Dillard business. Papa said what business? Mrs. Bauer said everybody knows, Papa. June said this at dinner with the neutrality of a correspondent delivering a dispatch. What did your father say to that? Hazel asked. He said he'd ask you. Callum was looking at his stew. Did she? He said. I didn't tell anyone, Hazel said. Word finds its own way out, Callum said. June ate a piece of bread. Tommy Aldridge's father sells to Dillard, she said. He hasn't said anything yet, but Tommy says his father has been going through old papers. She said it without visible satisfaction, but there was something underneath. A child's sense of justice, finding its shape. Hazel didn't say anything about that. Some things you let settle on their own. It was June who asked the question, the way it had to be June, arriving at the center of things by the most direct route available. It was an evening in April, warm enough finally to have the windows open a crack, the smell of the orchard coming through on a soft wind. Callum was at the table with a seed catalog he'd been studying for 2 evenings. Hazel was at the counter going over the spring planting notes she'd been keeping. June was on the floor near the stove with her drawing board, working on what she'd told them was a map of the orchard, all 60 acres, every row labeled, which had already taken 4 evenings and showed no signs of being rushed. Are you going to stay? June asked. She asked it without looking up from the map. Simply, the way she asked everything. Callum's hand went still on the catalog. I live here, Hazel said. I know that, June said, but living somewhere and deciding to stay aren't always the same thing. She kept drawing. I want to know if you're still deciding. The window was open, and the orchard was dark outside it, and the lamp on the table made the room its own warm world. Hazel looked at June on the floor, her head bent over her map, the small, careful marks of her pen moving across it. She looked at Callum, who was not looking at either of them, his eyes on the catalog page, his face doing the thing it did when he was waiting for something he was afraid to wait with hope. I'm not still deciding, Hazel said. June looked up. She looked at her father. Papa. I heard her, Callum said. His voice was rough at the edges. Good, June said. She looked back at her map. I'm going to include the creek in the drawing. She drew a careful line across the paper. I need more room. Hazel laughed, the unrehearsed kind that arrives before the decision to laugh. And after a moment, Callum made a sound that was also a laugh, quiet and brief and real. June looked up at both of them with the expression of someone who had said the correct thing and knew it, and then went back to her map. There were still hard things. There always were. May brought a late frost that took the early blossoms on the south block, which cost them tonnage and required 3 days of assessment to understand the full extent of the damage. There was a disagreement with the Dunmore feed supplier over a delivery that arrived short and had to be argued through carefully and without raising the level of heat it deserved to be raised to. There was a week in June when June herself was sick with something that wasn't serious but wasn't mild either, and Hazel kept close to the house, and Callum took on extra work without discussion, and they managed, which was the word she kept coming back to. They managed, which was not the same as easy, and was better than fine. The Helena Cooperative's terms came through in writing in May. $34 on premium, $30 on base, with a 2-year contract option at those prices. Callum read it at the kitchen table, and then set it down and looked at it for a while. I want to plant 2 more rows, he said. Honeycrisp variety. There's demand for them in the Helena market, and the soil on the north slope is right for them. Hazel looked up from the planting notes. How long to first production? 3 years minimum. She looked at the north slope annotation in her notebook. 3 years is the right timeline, she said. You'd be doing the work now for the orchard you want in 3 years. He looked at her. You'd be here. We'd be here, she said. Something in his face settled. Not a dramatic thing. The quiet settling of a man who had been uncertain for a long time about something, and had stopped being uncertain. Together, he said. She thought about that later, in her room with the window open to the May night, the orchard still outside, the blossoms that had survived the frost just beginning to open in the blocks that hadn't taken damage, small white shapes in the dark that she couldn't see but knew were there. Because she knew every row now, every tree, every variation in the grade of the land beneath them. She had come here on a November train with $43 and a carpetbag and a letter from a man she'd never met. She had come because there was nowhere better to go, which was not the beginning she would have written for herself. But she'd learned a long time ago that the beginnings you wrote for yourself were rarely the ones that led anywhere worth going. What she had found here was not what the letter described, which was an orchard and a daughter and a man looking for practical help. What she'd found was a place that had been well built by someone who loved it, and then maintained through hard years by a man who couldn't quite afford to love it fully because he'd been too tired and too alone, and a girl who was holding everything together with a discipline that was both admirable and too much for a 9-year-old to carry. All of it had been waiting for someone to look at what was actually there, not at what was missing, not at what the ledger said the bad years had cost, at what was there, the rows of trees, the trained and careful branches, the soil that drained right on the east blocks and held moisture on the north slope, the flock of small knowledge accumulated in a blue book by a woman who'd paid attention to the right things. She had been that person. She hadn't known she would be when she answered the letter. You rarely knew. Outside the May night was cool, and the orchard was quiet, and somewhere in the dark rows the honeycrisp trees were not yet planted, 3 years from their first fruit, waiting for 2 people who had decided, without ceremony, to be there when they came.